I died choking on my own breath in a sterile hospital room, listening to my stepson laughing in the hallway about his new inheritance. But the universe has a funny way of settling debts. I opened my eyes 5 years earlier, and this time I wasn't going to be the victim. The last thing I remember from my first life is the smell of cheap institutional bleach and the agonizingly slow beep of my heart monitor. I was 62, but I felt 90. The cancer had hollowed me out, leaving nothing but brittle bones and a shattered heart. But the physical pain was a dull ache compared to the agonizing betrayal happening just outside my door. Through the thin, cracked wood of the hospice room door, I could hear them. "The realtor says we can list the Oak Ridge estate by next Tuesday." Liam's voice drifted in, crisp and completely devoid of grief. Liam, the Stepson I had raised since he was 7 years old. The boy I had loved as my own flesh and blood, after his father, my beloved husband, Arthur, passed away. Finally, Brenda, Liam's wife, sighed. I could picture her leaning against the wall, checking her manicured nails. "I swear, if she hangs on another month, we'll miss the spring market. Do you know how much we are paying for this dump of a care facility? It's eating into our margins." "Relax, Bren. The doctors said it's a matter of hours. We've got the power of attorney. The house is in my name. The accounts are drained, and the old bat has absolutely nothing left to her name. We've won." A cold tear slipped down my hollow cheek, pooling in my ear. They were right. I had given them everything. When Arthur died 5 years ago, my world collapsed. On his deathbed, I held his trembling hand and promised him I would always take care of his son. I took that vow with a blinding, foolish devotion. Liam had played the part of the devastated son perfectly. He leaned on me, wept on my shoulder, and told me he couldn't manage his grief while worrying about his father's sprawling manufacturing business and the massive Oak Ridge estate. So I made it easy for him. I signed over the voting rights to the company. I transferred the deed of the family home into his name, believing his promise that it would remain our family sanctuary forever. I moved into the small, drafty guest cottage by the lake, convinced I was doing the noble, motherly thing. I gave him my crown, and he used it to crush me. Within 3 years, he and Brenda had burned through Arthur's cash reserves, funding lavish trips to Monaco and buying imported sports cars they couldn't afford. When my diagnosis came, they didn't offer a shred of support. Instead, they panicked about my medical bills. While I was delirious with chemotherapy, Liam tricked me into signing away my rights to the guest cottage, claiming it was for a tax loophole. 2 weeks later, the eviction notice arrived. They sold the cottage to a developer, threw me into the cheapest state-run hospice they could find, and left me to rot. My breathing grew shallow. The monitor beside my bed began to emit a frantic, continuous tone. My lungs burned, grasping for air that wouldn't come. "Is she—" Brenda's voice came from the doorway. "Looks like it," Liam said. He stepped into my line of sight. He didn't look sad. He looked relieved. He reached out, not to hold my hand, but to pull the gold wedding band off my increasingly cold finger. "Arthur's ring," he muttered. "This will fetch a few grand at auction." My vision faded to black. The betrayal burned so fiercely in my chest that I thought my soul would catch fire. If I had just one more chance, I screamed in the dark void of my mind. If I could just go back, I would burn their world to ashes. And then I woke up. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I bolted upright, my hands clutching my chest, expecting to feel the wires of the heart monitor and the suffocating weight of my failing lungs. But there were no wires. My lungs expanded fully, easily, drawing in a deep, sweet breath of air that smelled faintly of lavender and Arthur's old cedarwood cologne. I was sitting in my own bed, the grand four-poster oak bed in the master suite of the Oak Ridge estate. Disoriented, I looked down at my hands. They were smooth, firm, and lacking the purple bruising of endless IV lines. My wedding ring sat snugly on my left hand. Trembling, I reached for the smartphone on the bedside table. The screen lit up, blindingly bright. Tuesday, October 12th. 5 years ago. I dropped the phone on the silk sheets. My mind spun in violent circles. This wasn't a dream. It was too vivid, too real. The heavy velvet curtains, the crisp morning light filtering through the bay windows, the steady rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I had been sent back. The universe, in all its chaotic mystery, had answered my dying curse. Then my blood ran cold. October 12th. I knew this date intimately. It was exactly 1 month after Arthur's funeral. It was the day I was scheduled to meet Liam at the offices of our family attorney, Mr. Harrison, to sign over the deed to the Oak Ridge estate and hand him the keys to the kingdom. In my previous life, I had spent this morning weeping over old photo albums, completely vulnerable, before driving to the lawyer's office and giving away my life. This time, there were no tears, only a terrifying, icy calm settling over my soul. I stood up, walked into the sprawling master bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked healthy. I looked alive. The grief of losing Arthur was still a heavy stone in my chest, but the blinding naivete was gone, burned away by the memory of Liam prying this very ring from my dead finger. I dressed meticulously. Instead of the drab, oversized morning sweater I had worn the first time around, I chose a sharp, tailored black St. John suit. I pulled my hair back into a severe chignon. I looked like a woman going to war. Before heading to the formal meeting with Liam, I arrived at the law offices of Harrison and Finch a full 2 hours early. Mr. Harrison, a sharp-eyed man in his late 50s who had been Arthur's most trusted confidant, looked surprised to see me. Clara. We weren't scheduled to meet until 11 with Liam. "Is everything all right?" he asked, ushering me into his mahogany-paneled office. "Everything is fine, Richard," I said, taking a seat and crossing my legs. "But we need to make some immediate, highly confidential changes to the paperwork I'm signing today." Harrison frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Arthur's will left everything to you, Clara. You have total control. I advised you last week against transferring the Oak Ridge deed directly to Liam. He's reckless. I know he's your stepson, but it's a massive asset to surrender unconditionally." "You were right, Richard," I said smoothly, "which is why I am not giving it to him." I laid out my plan. In my first life, I hadn't realized that Arthur, brilliant businessman that he was, had structured a fail-safe into his portfolio. He had created an obscure, empty holding company called Valiant Holdings, which was solely in my name. "I want the deed to the Oak Ridge estate transferred to Valiant Holdings," I instructed. "Not to Liam." "But Liam is expecting the house," Richard said, thoroughly confused. Liam will get a piece of paper that gives him an irrevocable lifetime lease and management rights to the property, I explained, leaning forward. The lease agreement will be drafted with maximum legal jargon, burying the fact that he is merely a tenant. We will name him the executive administrator of the estate. He will be responsible for all property taxes, maintenance, and upkeep. He will believe he owns it, but Valiant Holdings, which means I, will retain the actual deed. If he ever tries to sell the property, leverage it for a loan, or default on the taxes, the lease becomes instantly void, and absolute possession reverts entirely to me. Richard stared at me, his jaw slightly slack. In all the years he had known me, I had been the soft-spoken, accommodating wife. He didn't know the woman sitting across from him had already died once. Slowly, a smirk spread across the lawyer's face. It's a magnificent trap, Clara. He's too arrogant to read the fine print of a 50-page administrative lease, especially if the cover page says he is the sole master of the estate. But why the deception? Because, I said softly, staring out the window at the bustling city below, I need to see what he does when he thinks he has all the power. By 11 o'clock, the trap was set. The heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open, and Liam walked in, followed closely by Brenda. Liam looked exactly as I remembered him from 5 years ago, impeccably styled hair, wearing a custom Italian suit bought with his father's money, radiating a sense of absolute entitlement beneath a thin veneer of forced solemnity. Brenda wore a black dress that was entirely too tight for a legal meeting concerning a death in the family, clutching a designer handbag like a trophy. Clara, Liam said, stepping forward and wrapping his arms around me. He smelled of expensive espresso and deceit. How are you holding up? I know today is incredibly hard. I'm managing, Liam, I said, patting his back lightly, fighting the urge to push him away. We are just so worried about you, Brenda chimed in, offering a sympathetic pout that didn't reach her calculating eyes. Living in that massive house all alone with Arthur gone, it's too much for you. We just want to take the burden off your shoulders. The burden, I thought darkly. You mean the multi-million-dollar equity? Thank you, Brenda, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. I appreciate your concern. Mr. Harrison has the paperwork ready. We sat around the massive conference table. Richard Harrison was a master of his craft. He slid a thick, imposing stack of documents across the table. Liam, Richard began, his tone professional and dry. Clara has decided to step away from the management of the Oak Ridge property. These documents establish you as the sole executive administrator and resident of the estate. It transfers the day-to-day authority, the tax liabilities, and the residency rights entirely into your hands. Clara will be moving to the guest cottage by the lake, as discussed. Liam's eyes gleamed with raw greed. He barely glanced at the summary page. So it's mine. I make the calls now. You are the master of the house, Liam, I said quietly, watching him like a hawk studying a field mouse. Just sign on the dotted lines. He didn't read it. Just as Richard and I had predicted, Liam was too blinded by his own ego, too eager to get his hands on the prize, to actually read the 50 pages of dense legalese that explicitly stated he was merely a tenant, taking on the financial liabilities of a holding company. He grabbed the Mont Blanc pen from the table and hastily scrawled his signature across 6 pages, effectively signing away his own financial security, while believing he was conquering mine. Brenda squeezed his thigh under the table, her eyes practically flashing with dollar signs. Thank you, Clara, Liam said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. I promise. I'll take care of the estate exactly how Dad would have wanted. We'll make you proud." "I'm sure you will," I smiled, a tight, cold expression. "I'll have my things moved out by the weekend." As they practically skipped out of the law office, celebrating their stolen victory, Richard looked at me. "They have no idea what they just signed." "No, they don't," I murmured, picking up my purse. "Now they are going to pay the taxes, upgrade the plumbing, and polish the floors of a house they will never own. And when the time is right, Richard, I am going to pull the rug right out from under them." The first battle was won. I had the deed. I had my health. Now I just had to sit in the shadows of my lakeside cottage and watch my stepson dig his own grave. The next 3 years played out like a glittering, slow-motion car crash. From the quiet sanctuary of the lakeside guest cottage, I watched Liam and Brenda build their house of cards. They wasted no time erasing Arthur's memory from the Oak Ridge estate. Within a month of our meeting at Richard Harrison's office, construction crews descended upon the property. Brenda, acting the part of the newly minted aristocrat, hired the prestigious design firm of Kelly Werstler to completely gut the classic interiors. Out went Arthur's antique mahogany bookshelves and Persian rugs. In came stark, cold marble, avant-garde chandeliers, and mirrored walls that reflected nothing but their own vanity. Liam, meanwhile, was playing the titan of industry. He purchased a midnight blue Aston Martin DB11, roaring up and down the winding driveway, a physical manifestation of his unchecked ego. They threw lavish, Gatsby-esque parties that spilled out onto the manicured lawns, popping champagne with local socialites and sycophants who were more than happy to drink from Liam's seemingly bottomless well of inherited wealth. But I knew the truth. I knew the well was drying up. While Liam paraded around as the master of Oak Ridge, I spent my days quietly managing Valiant Holdings. Arthur had been a genius. He had diversified his wealth far beyond the primary manufacturing business he left to his son. Through Valiant, I quietly invested in low-risk index funds and municipal bonds. I lived simply, drank cheap tea, and watched the financial markets, biding my time. Liam's arrogance was his fatal flaw. He assumed that because his father had built a self-sustaining empire, it required no actual leadership. He stopped showing up to board meetings. He alienated Arthur's oldest, most loyal clients, replacing them with fast-talking startup grifters who promised impossible returns. By the beginning of the 4th year, the cracks began to show. The extravagant parties abruptly stopped. The landscaping crew was let go, leaving the sprawling rose gardens to choke on weeds. I noticed Brenda trading her designer stilettos for large sunglasses, hiding her face when she angrily collected the mounting piles of mail from the front gate. Then came the day I had been waiting for. A crisp Tuesday afternoon in November, exactly 4 years after I had signed away my life. I was sitting on the porch of the guest cottage, wrapped in a thick wool shawl, reading a novel. The crunch of gravel alerted me. Liam and Brenda were marching down the path toward my door. Liam looked haggard. The bespoke Italian suit he wore was slightly wrinkled, and he had dark, bruised bags under his eyes. Brenda looked furious, clutching a sleek leather folder to her chest. "Clara," Liam said, not bothering with a greeting. His voice was clipped, desperate. "We need to talk." "Hello, Liam." "Brenda," I said mildly, marking my page and setting the book on the table. "To what do I owe the pleasure? It's been months." "I'm going to cut right to the chase," Liam said, pacing on the small wooden deck. "The manufacturing business is going through temporary liquidity crisis. Supply chain issues, bad market timing. You know how it is." "I don't, actually," I replied softly. "Arthur never seemed to have those issues." Liam's jaw tightened. "Times change, Clara. The point is, I need capital. Fast. And the Oak Ridge estate is sitting on 10 acres of prime real estate. I've been in talks with Toll Brothers." I raised an eyebrow. Toll Brothers was one of the nation's premier luxury home builders. "They want the land," Brenda interjected, her voice shrill and impatient. "They are going to bulldoze the main house and this rundown cottage to build an exclusive gated community of mega mansions. They've offered us $12 million in cash." "12 million," I repeated, letting the number hang in the crisp autumn air. "Yes, it closes all our debts and leaves us with millions in profit," Liam said, trying to sound authoritative, though his hands were shaking slightly. "The deal closes next Friday, which brings us to you, Clara. We're going to need you to vacate this cottage by Monday, just like my first life. The cold, mechanical eviction. The utter disregard for the woman who had raised him, fed him, and loved him." My heart gave a heavy, rhythmic thud. But this time, there was no panic. There was only the icy thrill of the hunt. "You want me out in less than a week?" I asked, feigning distress. "Liam, where will I go? I have a fixed income." "That's really not our problem, Clara," Brenda snapped, rolling her eyes. "We gave you 3 years of free rent here. You should have been saving up. We have the closing meeting with the buyers at Sotheby's International Realty downtown next week. The bulldozers arrive on the 1st of the month." "I see," I whispered, looking down at my hands. "Well, I suppose you leave me no choice." "Glad you understand," Liam said, turning on his heel. "Have your things packed by Sunday night. I'll send a moving truck." I watched them walk back up the path, heading toward the grand house that was currently eating them alive. I didn't pack a single box. Instead, I picked up my phone and dialed Richard Harrison. "Richard," I said as soon as he answered. "The rat has taken the cheese. He's trying to sell the estate to Toll Brothers." A low chuckle came through the receiver. "Is he now? Well, Clara, it appears it is time to drop the guillotine. Shall I prepare the valiant documents?" "Bring everything," I said, a dangerous smile spreading across my face. I wouldn't miss this closing for the world. The executive boardroom at Sotheby's International Realty was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the city skyline. A massive slab of polished mahogany served as the conference table. When I walked through the glass doors on Friday morning, the room went dead silent. Liam was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by Brenda. Across from him sat 2 sharply dressed executives from Toll Brothers, a representative from First American Title, and the listing agent from Sotheby's. "Clara?" Liam stood up, his face flushing with a mixture of anger and confusion. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you to be out of the cottage." "Arthur's estate is a family matter, Liam," I said smoothly, taking an empty leather chair at the far end of the table. "I merely wanted to be present for the final chapter of our home." Brenda scoffed, whispering something venomous into Liam's ear. Liam glared at me, but forced a tight, professional smile for the buyers. "Fine, sit quietly. We are just about to finalize the transfer." The representative from First American Title, a middle-aged woman with thick spectacles, cleared her throat. "Yes, well, before we proceed with the wire transfer of the $12 million to Mr. Liam's accounts, we just need to finalize the signatures on the deed transfer." Liam reached for his Mont Blanc pen, the very same pen he had used 3 years ago. He leaned over the documents, vibrating with anticipation. This was his salvation. This was the moment he escaped his catastrophic financial failures. Before the NIB of his pen could touch the paper, the heavy boardroom doors swung open again. Richard Harrison strode in, carrying a thick, leather-bound briefcase. He looked immaculate, radiating the quiet power of a man who held all the cards. "Mr. Harrison?" Liam looked up, bewildered. "What are you doing here? You aren't represented on this sale. I hired my own counsel." "I am well aware of that, Liam," Richard said calmly, walking over and standing directly behind my chair. "I am not here to represent you. I am here representing the legal owner of the Oak Ridge estate." The room fell into a confused hush. The Toll Brothers executives exchanged nervous glances. "I am the owner," Liam said, his voice rising in volume. "We went over this 3 years ago. You drafted the paperwork yourself." "I drafted a lease, Liam," Richard corrected, opening his briefcase and pulling out a pristine stack of documents with a heavy, embossed seal. "A highly restrictive conditional lease naming you the executive administrator. You see, the actual deed to the property was transferred out of Arthur's personal trust and directly into a private holding company called Valiant Holdings." Liam froze. The color rapidly drained from his face. "Valiant? What?" "Valiant Holdings," Richard repeated, sliding a document across the mahogany table toward the title agent. "If you check the county registry, you will see that Valiant Holdings has been the sole proprietor of the deed for the last 3 years. The woman from First American Title hurriedly tapped on her laptop, pulling up the municipal records. Her eyes widened. "He's right. The deed is registered to Valiant Holdings. Mr. Liam, your name is only listed under an administrative tenant agreement." "That's impossible!" Brenda shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "We pay the property taxes. We paid for a $2 million renovation." "Yes, you did," I spoke up, my voice cutting through the panic in the room like a silver blade. Everyone turned to look at me. "And Valiant Holdings thanks you for the free upgrades to the property." Liam stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Clara, what did you do?" "I survived, Liam," I said, folding my hands neatly on the table. "Which brings us to the fine print of that lease you eagerly signed without reading, Richard. According to Section 4, Paragraph B of the Executive Administrator Agreement," Richard recited from memory, "any attempt by the tenant to sell, leverage, or alter the structural deed of the property, without the express written consent of Valiant Holdings, constitutes a catastrophic breach of contract. Furthermore, a secondary breach has occurred." Richard pulled out another piece of paper. "I have here a notice from the county tax assessor. Liam, you have failed to pay the $70,000 in property taxes for the current fiscal year. Under Section 8, defaulting on taxes results in the immediate, irrevocable termination of your tenancy." "No," Liam whispered, dropping his pen. It clattered loudly against the wood. "No, no, no, I need this sale. I owe the banks. I owe investors. If I don't sell this land—" "You are bankrupt," I finished for him, feeling no pity, only the sweet, cleansing rush of justice. "You drove your father's legacy into the ground, and you tried to sell the dirt it was built on to save your own skin." The Toll Brothers executives abruptly stood up, snapping their briefcases shut. "We have no interest in purchasing a property caught in a hostile title dispute," the lead buyer said grimly. This deal is dead. Do not contact us again." They walked out, followed quickly by the title agent and the Sotheby's representative, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of Liam's failure. Soon, it was just the four of us in the sprawling glass room. Brenda burst into hysterical tears, clutching her designer bag, realizing that every diamond on her finger and every luxury car in their driveway was about to be repossessed by the banks. Liam looked at me, his eyes wide, pleading, reverting back to the helpless boy he pretended to be when his father died. "Clara, Mum, please, you can't do this. Valiant Holdings. Who owns it? If you have pull with them, please. I'll lose everything. I'll go to jail for fraud with the company accounts." I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I walked around the massive table until I was standing right in front of him. I looked down into his terrified, greedy eyes, remembering the way he had pulled Arthur's gold ring off my lifeless finger in a sterile hospice room. "I am the sole proprietor of Valiant Holdings, Liam," I said softly, watching his world shatter into a million irreparable pieces. "I own the estate. I own the cottage. And as of 10 minutes ago, your lease is officially terminated. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from my property. If you are not gone by noon tomorrow, I will have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing." You planned this," he choked out, tears of absolute despair finally spilling down his cheeks, "from the very beginning." "I gave you enough rope," I whispered, leaning in close so only he could hear. "And you tied your own noose. Goodbye, Liam." I turned my back on them and walked out of the boardroom alongside Richard, leaving them to drown in the ruin they had so meticulously built for themselves. The air outside the Sotheby's building tasted like rain and absolute freedom. I hailed a cab, gave the driver the address to my sprawling, newly renovated estate, and smiled. I had been given a second chance at life, and I wasn't going to waste a single second of it. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey of betrayal and absolute justice. Clara's brilliant trap proves that you should always read the fine print and never underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. If you loved watching Liam and Brenda get exactly what they deserved, make sure you smash that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good revenge story, and subscribe for more real-life drama. See you next time.